Welcome to Entrepreneurs, Executives, and Eccentrics, a podcast dedicated to the stories, strategies, and secrets of remarkable individuals. Join us as we engage in enlightening conversations with intriguing entrepreneurs, accomplished executives, and fascinating eccentrics, exploring their journeys, triumphs, and unconventional wisdom that has shaped their success.
It shot out and through the wall and it landed in the street. And we went out there and we looked at it and we're like, oh my God, thank the Lord, the guy that shot the rocket didn't pull the arming pin out of the nose of the explosive. So otherwise we all would have been killed and blown up.
Get ready to meet Mark Michel, a seasoned veteran with 22 years of Navy service, including pivotal roles in Iraq and Afghanistan. As the Navy's representative to the National Security Council during the Obama administration, Mark applied his expertise in targeting high-value individuals and managing human intelligence networks. Now an entrepreneur and infrastructure developer, he leverages his military and leadership skills to lead audacious projects in railroads, refineries, terminals, pipelines, and power systems. Mark combines his strategic insights with a focus on environmental safety and demographic trends, positioning his company to tackle contemporary global challenges. So would you please tell me how you got here? Right, you're like, if you look at your LinkedIn profile, it goes this crazy story, you know, you and I have talked a couple of times, and every time I talk to you, I'm blown away. Right, I'm just saying the story is it's just amazing. So would you mind kind of starting kind of where I guess your time in the Navy, or is that really start before then? Obviously, everything starts before then, but
yeah, it starts in a hospital room with your mom and a doctor.
Right. Right.
Or at least in the modern world.
Right. So how did you start? How did that career start?
Yeah, no, I mean, just long and short of it. So, you know, I was born and raised in Orlando, Florida, and you know, grew up as a normal middle class kid, you know, to a military family. My dad was in the Army his whole life, or at least, you know, from the time I was born all the way through, you know, till he retired when I was in college. But, you know, grandparents, actually three out of my four grandparents served in World War II. Even my grandmother, she was a nurse in Patton's army in World War II in Europe, and met my grandfather at a USO, you know, World War II kind of cantina, like, you know, back in the movies, you know, they got together for a cup of coffee and a Glenn Miller dance, and you know, next thing you know, they were off married and you know, going to two separate theaters of war. My grandfather served in the Pacific. Battle of Okinawa and some various different campaigns throughout the Pacific War, and my grandmother was in Europe with General Patton and the push into Germany, and she was actually one of the very first medical professionals on scene. She was a nurse, but she was running a MASH hospital through you know, the western part of Germany, as the Allies were pushing across Germany, going towards Berlin, trying to end the war in 1945. She was at Bergen-Belsen, you know, concentration camp, helping to, you know, nurse back, you know, a lot of the Holocaust victims as they were, you know, kind of left by the SS and left by the German army as they were retreating back east towards Berlin. So it was kind of interesting hearing those stories growing up as a kid. And so, you know, growing up in a deep military family, I would just, you know, I've kind of almost like a preconceived notion that I'd follow the family business that almost every man, you know, male in my family had served sometime in uniform, whether it was for a career or whether it was for just, you know, kind of 4 years and out. But so it was always kind of like just a thought that it wasn't really a matter of like if I would go in the military. It was really a matter of what branch and when. And so, you know, I go all the way through childhood and then through high school. And you know, I would say that the thing I was most interested in high school, I just didn't know what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be yet. But the thing I knew I liked the most was girls, beer, and sports, and that was what, you know, really kind of drove me to the life's decision to join the Navy at like 17 years old. And I enlisted in the Navy. You know, spent my initial time in the fleet as an enlisted kid, and then ended up deciding to go to Auburn University with the help of the government, and you know, was there for 4 years. Graduated, you know, started in 1993, graduated in 1997, and then, you know, started you know, my military career. So, you know, obviously just trying to think about, you know, maybe getting out kind of right around the 9/11 time frame, and then, you know, 9/11 happened, and then for my generation, you know, it was pretty much a no one got out. It was like everybody wanted to pitch in and do their service and fight for the country and rectify some wrongs. And, it was our generation's Pearl Harbor moment. And, so that really led me to really finishing out my naval career on active duty. And, spent the next, better part of 12, 13 years, throughout my, 20s and 30s, in uniform, doing multiple tours, across Iraq and Afghanistan, and then ultimately, kind of the crescendo of my career was, being nominated to be the Navy's representative to the National Security Council, where, served in the White House Situation Room as the Navy's rep to the Situation Room. And, that was during the Obama administration. So I was there from 2012 to 14. So I served basically the last year of Obama's first term and then the first year of his second term. So I was there for the 2012, re-election campaign, and I was there for Benghazi, and was there for the Arab Spring, and a lot of other interesting world events that happened at that time. So, and then from there, I decided, was ready to go off and do some different things. It's kind of funny, like when you become a commander or higher, I retired as a commander, but Navy commander, but like as you become a commander and a captain and an admiral, kind of the senior ranks, you start realizing that what you came in the military to do, which was be with the boys and fight and jump out of planes and fly planes and do all the stuff that you learn about on Top Gun or in Navy SEAL movies and all the different stuff. All that stuff is the stuff that you really kind of come in for. But what they start realizing is that as you start growing gray hair and getting older and the joints start hurting and the natural wear and tear on your body, you start obviously gaining a lot more experience, and they want you to really not be out there in the field doing the stuff anymore. It's really more about leading from a position of leadership, and typically that means from a desk. And so you're leading budgets, and you're leading manpower and training evolutions, and trying to make sure your guys are getting on target with the maximum amount of food, butter, and bullets, and
Right.
and making sure that they're effective. And so you're doing that stuff as more of a senior officer. And so that was great. But at the time in 2014, when I was deciding to retire, really it was the wrapping up of Iraq had wrapped up in 10. We had a skeleton crew of folks, as we still do in Iraq with the embassy, and that was about it. So the footprint there had been kind of wrapped up, and we were really definitely pulling out of kinetic role in Afghanistan. My last tour with SEAL Team 8 and SEAL Team 10 in 2010 and 11 was the kind of the last culmination of really kind of a lot of the kinetic activities that we had, where we were out in the field, kind of really getting it on with the Taliban and various different kind of Al Qaeda arms and things of that nature. I was principally responsible in the P2K area of Eastern Afghanistan. P2K stands for Paktia, and Coast in Ghazni. It's kind of that eastern section of Afghanistan that butts up against the Pakistan border. And so we were targeting HVIs, which high valued individuals, and principally in the Haqqani network and in HIG, which is Hizb Islami Gulbuddin, which are really kind of two big factions of the Taliban. They're basically led by two different warlords. And so we were really kind of slinging it out with those guys on a nightly basis, chasing leadership targets, going after foreign fighter networks, money facilitators to pay for car bombs and pay for weapons caches and all the things that they were bringing into Afghanistan to fight us. And so we were chasing those rat lines and chasing those sources. And
you were principally responsible for kind of going after those very, very specific targets, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I was the head of all the targeting in those districts. So we principally based out of a forward operating base in Ghazni, and then we would operate within. There's some other forward operating bases in the kind of what they called P2K area, which is one was in a place called Sharana, which is in Paktika, which is the neighboring province that butts up against the Pakistan border, as well as up in Coast, which is where Camp Chapman was, where we were also operating in. So we kind of operating in that little triangle of that region of Afghanistan. So my job was to run a human network, to develop and run a human network of sources. As a licensed collector, I was out there, recruiting sources and debriefing them and getting information to target various high value individuals. And then we would typically, use electronic signals, conversations that we had access to through different methods of, phone conversations and things of that nature. And we understood who was talking to who and what they were saying. And so that kind of persistent overhead collection of sucking in all those communications electrons that were able to validate what we were finding out from our source networks. And so, that's the way you avoid getting blown up and getting into firefights, ambushes, is to validate your information, through multiple sources and through electronic, communications. So we were doing that's how we target, and that's where I was principally one responsible for figuring out who we were going after every night. And then, would sit down with me and the ground force commander, and we would sit down and figure out, okay, here's the top 10 guys I want to go after. This guy here on, number 2 or number 3 or number 1 or wherever it was, we've got good intel on him tonight. So let's go after him, and let's set up a raid and a plan of where to find him in the most inopportune way that we can for him, and the most opportune way for us. And typically that was at night.
So you're swooping in through helicopters. You're setting out miles out. You're swooping in. You're eliminating whatever. You're grabbing someone. That sounds like
yeah. No, we have 2 typical ways that we would go in. We'd either go what's called land on the X, which means you'd put the helicopter right over the top of the compound that you're going into, and or right outside the walls, and so that's called landing on the X. And then or you do what's called an offset, which is to land, maybe 5 kilometers away so they can't hear you. And then you spend the next few hours patrolling in quietly into the, setting up what's called cordon, which is a kind of a perimeter, and then squeezing the target from there and going into the compound unannounced. So
that's a very squeeze the target sounds like a very nice way of saying killing a lot of people, but kind of squeezing the. So I typically I've had the honor of meeting a couple of you guys. Let's say you guys, I mean people specifically in that theater, and I typically ask them, what is the craziest thing you've ever seen, right to the high and the low? How long were you there, and was it weird coming back? Were you in some weird mindset when you got back? You had to be.
Yeah, I mean, like when you first come out after being gone for 5 or 6, 7 months, whatever the case may be, whatever long your tour is, you're obviously always super excited to come back, see your family, see your friends, kind of have a little bit of downtime. You're not so worried about getting shot anymore or taking indirect fire. I mean, we would take indirect fire on our compound like almost for sure on a daily basis, sometimes multiple times a day. There would just be. So we, in Afghanistan, most of our bases, our forward operating bases, usually to sit down in like a valley floor. So you have these high peaked mountains on each side of you typically. And so the Taliban would sit up in the mountains and they would line up rockets and mortar positions and different things and kind of try to zero them in and start lobbing mortars and rockets in on us on a daily basis. I remember one day there was a rocket. It was like a Chinese 105 millimeter rocket that all of a sudden, we're sitting in the dining facility, and this rocket came through the roof, hit the floor, shot out the wall of the wall. It's over there. It's like they're not concrete walls. They're like these tin, fabricated aluminum kind of walls, tin walls, and it shot out and through the wall and landed in the street. And we went out there and we looked at it and we're like, oh my God, thank the Lord. The guy that shot the rocket didn't pull the arming pin out of the nose of the explosive. So otherwise we all would have been killed and blown up.
The best, the brightest they're not, because it's just like a bunch of randos, right? Shooting from the top of the valley. They're just like, 7.62 into that camp and we'll just move over here for a while and on and on and on.
Yeah. I mean, this was a fairly sizable Chinese rocket. I mean, if it had detonated, it would have got a lot of us. But luckily that one, God was looking after us, and the idiot that shot it off didn't pull the pin out of it, so it was good. We were happy to see that, but no, normally they would fire these rockets and mortars into our compound, and sometimes they'd fall short, just land outside the perimeter. A lot of times, they just land on the airfield, or they'd land on in a motor pool area or whatever. But every once in a while they'd hit tents and birthing facilities and things of that nature. But also another time we had a mortar that hit our compound that we were living on, and we had this Connex box, which is like a kind of what you'd see on a back of a like a ship, right? Like one of those big containers that carry stuff from China over to Long Beach and Los Angeles, and it's typically how you get all your stuff that you get from Walmart or Target, right, or whatever you're buying. It comes in some big Connex shipping box, container, right? Yeah, shipping container, exactly. The military would a lot of times fabricate those Connex boxes into like bathrooms, and so our bathroom in Afghanistan was like had like 2 toilets and a sink and a urinal and a shower, one shower in there, and they were able to basically lift it with a helicopter and put it in place for us to be able to use for our deployment. And so one day the Taliban shot a mortar into our compound, and it literally landed, and it blew up the bathroom, blew up our head. And so there was a proverbial crap everywhere, right? So it sucked. Like we had to figure out where else to go use the restroom for a little bit, but luckily the Army dropped another one in for us to use, which was very kind of them. But there's those kind of funny moments where sometimes they're funny, sometimes they're like, damn it, like how are we supposed to do this? It's already sucked being overseas and missing your family and kids and friends and missing life's events and things of that nature, and and then they blow up your bathroom, and now you got to figure out how to get along with life without it. Which there's worse things in the world. We figured it out fine, but but it gets kind of to that point where you're going to wake up that day, and as you wake up, sometimes you wake up to the sound of explosions, and the sirens going off, and sometimes you'd been out all night, on target, and you're just exhausted, and you're sleeping in your B hut, which is like basically a little tiny hut that we build, and it's got 4 walls and a door, and that's about it, and it's elevated a little bit so the scorpions and critters don't get into your boots and get in your sleeping bag. But sometimes you're just so exhausted, like you literally hear a bomb go off, and you're just like, it wakes you up, and you're kind of like, all right, is that incoming or outgoing? Because typically we have the counter battery radar systems where our artillery guys on the base usually have a 105 howitzer, and so as soon as they see something coming in, they immediately send another outbound round. So a lot of times you'll hear an incoming or outgoing round with 2. So you hear a shot from the artillery at the same time as you hear like almost that an incoming explosion that hit you. So they're trading artillery rounds back and forth. So
all I can think of Afghanistan is like, didn't Alexander the Great turn around? Like he really made it all the way across, and it's like we're going back. This is not going to work. And then the Russians got waxed, obviously with help of Stinger missiles, for Mujahideen, et cetera, from the CIA. But what a terrible place to fight a damn war.
It is beautiful place though. It's too bad it's full of people that want to live a rustic life. I guess it's the polite way to say it. It has a lot of potential. I mean, it's such a beautiful place. I mean, the mountains I've never seen, short of maybe Lake Country in Switzerland or like Banff in Canadian Rockies. I mean, those are the only places I've ever seen as majestic of mountains as I've seen in the Hindu Kush of eastern Afghanistan. I mean, there's some seriously beautiful mountain ranges and beautiful green lush valleys with the rivers of all the the snows that melt, create these these wadis and rivers that the Afghans have for centuries and millennia have built these agricultural farms and things of that nature. So it's like these lush green valleys with surrounded by these desert formations of rocks that typically are snow capped with rugged features at the top. I mean, it's one of those things. I do remember every once in a while, like especially I was in Bagram getting ready to fly out on one of my deployments, looking up in the mountains, going, wow, it recently snowed up in the higher elevations, and you can see all the snow caps and everything, and it's just you're like, wow, this is really, really pretty. It's just, and then you start looking around, you're like, oh yeah, I'm in a war zone.
Right.
It's a dichotomy of realities, but it's a lot more attractive than I can tell you than Iraq. That's for sure. So
you had some time there as well.
It's physically beautiful. Sorry,
you were in Iraq as well. You had some time there as well.
Yeah, but nowhere near as enjoyable as Afghanistan. So, yeah,
that's not. I don't think anybody. That's the first time I've heard anybody describe Afghanistan as a more enjoyable place. But I mean, it's all about how you do the comparisons, right?
Yeah, I mean, like especially in the eastern sections of Afghanistan, up in the mountainous regions, it's not anywhere because it's such a high elevation. It's even the summertime. It's warm, but it's not oppressively hot like it is down south in like Kandahar, Helmand. Southern Afghanistan can get very, very hot, but everywhere in Iraq is hot. It is, especially in southern Iraq down near like Basra and south of Baghdad. The whole area from Baghdad south is just really, really humid and hot. So you'd think, it's the desert. It's supposed to be arid, but it's every bit as swampy as Florida and Louisiana and Texas all rolled up into 130 degree heat strand. I mean, it is really humid and hot, but and like I said, it is as well in southern Afghanistan down in Kandahar area, but up in the area that we were in, up on the P2K region, you're at like, I think we were operating in and around, like our FOB was in around 7,500 feet, maybe 8,000 feet in elevation. So and then you get up into the mountains. I mean, you were above 10,000 feet. So it was, it's just a little naturally cooler there, which is nice. It's a lot more enjoyable being up in that area than being, humping around Basra with a rucksack on you at 130 degrees outside with 100% humidity.
So that time, how many years is that in the Navy and et cetera? Is that 12 years? How many years is that?
I did a total from the time I enlisted in early 90s through the time I got out in 14. It was like 22 years.
Jesus. So just leadership of humans, right? Leadership of men, right? What did you learn? I mean, obviously 22 years is a long time to, you start out, you're just a dumb kid, right? We're all just dumb kids at this, 18, 19, when in your case, 17, 18, right? And you just kind of progress.
My wife still today claims I'm a dumb kid. So,
but you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, that is clearly translated to the private sector when you got out. You learn how to lead large, audacious, dangerous type projects, and so I'm trying to figure out how the hell you got from there to here, right?
Yeah, no, honestly, I would say that that's the one thing, like, being part of Naval Special Warfare, you do a lot of worthwhile, very enjoyable and worthwhile things on a daily basis, right? So like every day was about removing bad guys from the battlefield, right? It was like every day I had an opportunity to make a difference. And that's what I did, and it's all about, is the juice worth the squeeze? It's a very calculated, you learn how to calculate risk versus reward, because the risk is that people don't come home, either you or your friends, but the reward is that, you may take home, or, you may bring back to the base with you some Taliban commander or Al Qaeda, operative or something like that, where it's really going to, affect the battle space and keep people from dying, whether those are Afghan civilians or U.S. military service personnel. So it's a reward versus risk correlation and calculation that you do on a pretty much on a daily basis. And so that taught me in business, where do you invest money, right? Like where's and we always used to say, is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Like, I'm not going to deploy American troops on the ground to go chase a 14 or 15-year-old, hole digger was putting an IED in place on a road somewhere, right? Like you can go take a 14-year-old kid, hole digger, off the battlefield, kill or capture them, and there's going to be tomorrow another 14-year-old kid who's fairly untrained and unimportant, right? And so that's not your best use of, there's a lot more risk than there is reward in that regard. So we don't really waste our times with that stuff. It's really where we would say that the reward is worthwhile is going after, enemy leadership targets, or, what's called, key facilitators, right? Like a facilitator of money or foreign fighter network or something like that, where the juice is worth the squeeze, right? So I feel like I learned a really good way of calculating juice was worth the squeeze, risk versus reward correlation. That was something I learned very, very much. And then the other part is the resilience factor. Like you learn never to quit, right? No matter how hard and tough it gets, you got to put a bullet in you in order to stop you from constantly keeping your feet moving, right? So, I can tell you in business, we have constantly met adversity and met challenges, and there's also an old saying in the military is that you go into battle with a plan, but right as you step foot off that helicopter and the bullets start flying, that plan typically goes right out the door, and you have to learn to trust the instincts of the people that are around you, because you're all well trained, and you know how to react to adversity, and you know how to react to the dynamic environment. And sometimes things change, and you have to learn how to roll with the punches and make command decisions on the fly, and be able to react and move, shoot, and communicate, right? And that's the same thing we do in business. Is we're constantly moving and changing our envelope of engagement based on the factors on the ground. If things changed from the way your business plan started out, you can never tell if you run into some sort of adverse lawsuit that or a regulatory change that you had no control over, right? Something that happened at the governmental level, and it was completely out of your purview, and you've just got to deal with it, and you got to learn, okay, well, how do I overcome this challenge, right? Or if the inflation goes up and the cost of goods sold is just different from what you thought was going to be, right? Like how do you react to forces that are outside your control? Do you let it just beat you and you just say, well, I'm sorry, it just didn't work out, it didn't go as planned, it changed, and therefore you don't quit, you adapt and overcome. And I would say that one of those other great lessons that I learned from the military was how not to quit, and how to identify and train your people to be those types of people you want in the foxhole with you, right? You don't want quitters with you. You want people that are going to grind, that are going to just muscle out a win, right? And sometimes it just takes the grit and grind of just overcoming that adversity. And it's those types of people that I've met in the military that have some of those
right.
unique qualities of just knowing how to grind it out.
So two things. It's what Mike Tyson foreman said. Everybody's got a plan until you get hit in the mouth, right? Was the first thing, right?
Yeah.
And the second thing, does your grit drive people bonkers? Like when you hire someone and you're like, what are you doing stopping? Like, there's certain types, right? Probably don't align with that management style, which is do or die, right?
Yeah, and they typically don't stick around very long. Yeah, right. I'm there's also an old saying in the Navy, you work hard, you play hard, right? And so, I was never one of those types of people. Like, you go on a deployment and, you're gone for 6 or 8 months or whatever the case may be. You're working 24/7. There is no downtime. It's like whenever the bell rings, you're getting out of bed and you're answering that call. And so, sleep is a luxury on deployment, and rest and relaxation is a luxury on deployment. And so when we were always in port or we were home from a deployment, I was always kind of like, all right, check in for that day, do a few hours of whatever it needed to get done. If we didn't have something that was pressing that needed to get done that day, or something that week that you needed to kind of prepare for, that if it was really more of a, hey, we're home and kind of taking a breather, it's like, all right, checked in. All right, see you tomorrow. Like go enjoy time with your family and friends, and go on a trip. Go on leave. Go on a vacation. Do whatever you need to do in order to reset, because sometimes you have to have that mental downtime just to kind of catch your breath. And there's some people that were always like, it's a work day and it's a Monday or whatever. And, we're back off deployment, but we got to be here for a requisite 8 hours and punch that clock. And I'm like, you know what? Trust me, the Navy's getting their pound of flesh. It's time to when there's downtime, use that downtime for your mental acuity, right? Your mental health. And because, I can tell you right now, there's no luxury of having downtime when you're on deployment. So that's the way I look at my staff, and I look at the way we do our thing is, those of us in the leadership position and sitting in the decision making chairs, there's less of that opportunity. But like if my staff has someone's got to go to a high school football game because their kid is playing that day, or their cheerleaders playing, cheering that night, or they got to get to a practice or something, and there's not something that's critically going on at that point, obviously, you let them get a little rope to be able to go enjoy those things that they need to go do when they're able to do that. But but if there's a deal going on and a proposal that's got to get out, or an audit that's happening, because that's what we have to do at that certain point in time in the year. And when the rubber meets the road, I expect my people to be there locked and loaded, getting stuff done without equivocation, right?
The kind of business that you're in, though, I think requires that level of grit. I mean, think about the 21 years, or the number of years that you were there, and think about the amount of horse shit it takes to move infrastructure, right? To do exactly what you do. It's almost like it couldn't be anybody else, right? You couldn't be somebody else unless you had that level of organization, that level of never do or die, that level of all the things, because you're probably getting hit every single day with something. Like, can you describe exactly what your company does for the listeners here?
Yeah, so we are a infrastructure developer for the most part. So what we also do real estate and particularly self-storage development and things of that nature, but and commercial real estate. Our real core competency is to develop infrastructure transportation assets. So we really like railroads, we like terminals and pipelines, airports, power systems, transmission systems. Basically, if it carries a molecule of energy, or if it carries an electron of energy, we are big believers that in a long-term bet, kind of like we talked about risk and reward correlation, right? Like, bet on things that people use. Warren Buffett always said, you invest in things that you personally use, right? So, if you're brushing your teeth with Crest toothpaste, then you should probably invest in Crest, right? And you try to invest in things that you think have staying power and are things that they're so important that you're not going to be able to get away from them. So, I'm a big believer that energy, whether that be a traditional hydrocarbon or a renewable source of electricity, people, especially in the first world, they expect to live in a comfortable life. And, people want to get on planes and go on vacation or business trips. People want to drive to work or drive to a vacation, go to the beach on the weekends, whatever. People require electricity and power, whether that comes through gasoline or jet fuel, or comes through the electrons on your wall that you plug your EV into. Typically that electron that comes through your walls being created by burning coal or natural gas at the electrical power plant. So we believe in systems that provide quality of life to end users, and we believe investing in the transportation systems that bring the capability for that quality of life to happen, right? So we just love the transportation sector of the economy, and particularly in the infrastructure energy space.
It's interesting because most of the people that I talk to, and I kind of do businesses in the last couple of years, they typically can go back and say, okay, well, if I were 30 years old or 25 years old, maybe I would have done this differently, that differently. I don't. Where you are right now, Lily, was this journey that required all the blood, sweat, and tears to kind of get here, right? Like, is there anything you would have changed if you could go back? Like, what would you tell, Mark, 18-year-old Mark Michel? Would you do something different?
No, No,
I didn't think so.
I feel very, yeah, I feel very fortunate. And to be honest with you, it's not something that I at 18 or even 28 that I thought that I'd be doing what I do now. You can't. I mean, just the same way, like I couldn't have planned and you know told myself one day, oh, I want to be in the White House Situation Room, running the presidential daily brief and doing all this communication for the president of the United States and briefing him on a daily basis for what's going on in the world. Like, it's not something you can plan to do, right? I've always been a believer in that opportunity finds people, and you have to be smart enough and have enough courage to say yes to and walk through those doors when those opportunities present themselves. And it's not necessarily always, someone comes to you and says, hey, I want you to go run a company, or I want you to go do this or that. It's being smart enough also to understand where opportunities exist and that you can help to create, right? And I feel like as an entrepreneur, which is really ultimately what I am. I mean, I'm financial services, and we run limited partner capital to create these transportation systems and infrastructure assets. But so you obviously have to have a financial background in order to do that. But ultimately, it's having the vision to see, like, for instance, with our railroad project that we have in Utah, there hasn't been a new railroad licensed and built in this country in 50 years, since the Powder River Basin Railroad that was built in the 1970s. And, at that time, the Union Pacific and the BNSF, who were the two main railroads in that part of the country, there was a lot of massive coal mines in southern Utah, or in southern Wyoming. And so they needed an access system. They needed to expand the railroad to get up to those areas and expand rail transportation infrastructure to be able to access this massively stranded and captive resource that had to otherwise be trucked out, right? It's very similar to what we saw in Utah on the railroad asset that we have. Is the state of Utah, Northeast Utah, is the second largest proven oil reserves in the United States, but it's a unique type of waxy crude, which is it's the type of crude that has this naturally occurring wax paraffin in it. So if it gets colder than 110 degrees, it starts to solidify. That's its pour point, to where it starts to solidify and turn into a candle, right? So as you're shoving this through a pipeline, it's like shoving a Whopper through your artery, right? It just starts to clog up and turn into candle wax or a shoe polish consistency. And
so it's trains or nothing, basically. Yeah, it's trains or nothing then.
So it's crude by rail, because we're able to load it as it comes out of the ground as a hot liquid at like 150 degrees Fahrenheit. You're able to transport it like by truck to a terminaling location. You pour it into a rail car at above 110, but it'll cool off with the ambient temperature as the rail is not only either sitting there waiting to be the whole train waiting to be loaded, or even as let's say it's done quickly and you're able to load out a whole train in a day. It takes a week to get, maybe to Louisiana or Texas. And in that week, that stuff is cooling down and it's turning into a solid, and it turns into a candle, right? So it's really transported through places like Colorado or Kansas or Nebraska or wherever have you, all the states that are in between, the market and the source. It's turning into a solid, and it's transported basically as a candle. And so when they get on the back end, they heat it up using these big steam coils that are inside the car. They hook those steam coils to a valve on the outside, and they run hot steam through it in order to raise the temperature of that oil inside, that candle wax oil that's inside that car. And they bring it back above 110 degrees, and then they're able to drain it and put it into holding tanks. So, but this is the ideal.
That's safer though, isn't it? That type of product, would that be safer to transport over rail than, let's just say, liquid oil that's so crude or something?
Oh, 100%. Because if there was a derailment it's solid. Yeah. You'd get out there with shovels and just pick up a bunch of candle wax. And if it got into water, it floats. So, it's really not harmful to the environmentalists. They hate everything there is to do with any sort of development. So it's just, you can never convince them of anything, but logic is been lost on them. But outside of that, it's the ideal feedstock for refiners to create lubricants for the inside of your engine block. All the lubricants you'd need on a gearbox to have a wind farm, rotating rotating its blades, right? It's a great lubricant oil. It's a great cosmetic base oils. It creates plastics. So your eyeglasses that are made out of plastic, they came from oil. I mean, everything comes from oil for the most part. It's kind of hard to live without it. But this is that real high quality. It's not really meant to ideally to be burned from being created into a fuel. Although it can do that, it's really its highest best use is to turn into these specialty high margin products. So
that's fascinating. I dug into it a little bit. I read about this kind of but I didn't realize that was it's not necessarily you're going to be used as a hydrocarbon for a car. It's going to be used as a product based type oil. That's what it feels like. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Its best use is to make high margin products that are necessary through life, right? And like I said, it's either plastics or cosmetics or whatever have you. So, if it's from a business standpoint, obviously, if you're able to make a quart of motor oil and sell it at $12, that's a whole lot better of a margin than turning it into a gallon of gasoline and selling it at $3.80. I mean, it's a lot less volume, costing a lot more money, being able to turn it into a lubricant. So it's a better use of the oil is to turn it into these things like lubricants. So it's a necessary evil in this world.
So let's take a turn here. You got me into Peter Zeihan about 1.5 to 2 years ago, and I've been a bit of a disciple of his for a while. And we had talked about a year ago about you thought there may be a world where China is not going to make it in terms of a manufacturer, and the manufacturer may be moving to Yucatan/Mexico. Would you like to briefly talk about that bit, because it's one of my favorite topics?
Yeah, no, I think Peter's spot on, and he and a few other smart, George Friedman and some other scholars out there that are smart enough to look at demographics, which will tell you kind of everything you need to know about kind of where the world's going. In the 1980s, early 90s, when China had the cheapest cost of labor, because people were moving off, unskilled labor was moving off these farms and agricultural communities, and they were moving into these cities that are now, huge, glassy skyscraper type cities. The cities were attracting these laborers to create, cheap products. And so the cost of goods were able to really be beneficial for manufacturers to go to China as a labor market and have a really plentiful, cheap labor source. So everything's shored over there, 40 years ago. That is not the case anymore. You've got all those workers that moved into the cities, and Mao Zedong in the 1970s, instituted the one-child policy because they thought, the country was too populated. They were going to eat themselves to pieces, and famine. That one of the great sins of Chinese culture was the Great Leap Forward, and where you had some really serious famines in the 1950s that killed tens of millions of people, and so Mao thought that that was probably a good idea, is to try to limit the population and control the ability to not enter another famine, right? Well, kind of made sense, I guess, in the 1970s. But one of the things that they just didn't rectify that situation soon enough. And so for 40 years, you had a one-child policy. And then all of a sudden they realized demographically that they just didn't have enough 30 and 40 and 50-year-olds like that were going to be in the workforce,
and a propensity toward boys too, and a propensity toward boys, right? They were literally lower. Yeah. They were for however they were doing it. They were literally choosing, boys over girls.
Abortions in China were at historic highs, and they were, sex abortions, like elective abortions based on sex. So yeah, it's the greatest sex imbalance in the history of the world, in any society and civilization in the history of the world. So, so what you have is a deficiency of 40-year-olds right now. And because those 40-year-olds were either aborted or just not had, 40 years ago, it takes 40 years to make a 40-year-old. There's no other way. Otherwise, unless you want to have immigration and just have those people show up, but East Asia, having been over there, East Asia is not a really hospitable place to outsiders, and definitely not to immigration policies. So, China is going to suffer just, regardless of whether or not there is a famine or a war or any sort of outside influence that would cause a depopulation event. They're just naturally going to have, through the course of human existence, of just people die of natural causes at some point in your life. these people that are now 50, 60, 70 years old are going to naturally go through the course of life, and over the next 20 years, they're going to go from a country of 1.4 billion people today to about 700 million by the year 2050. So they're going to be cut in half as far as population goes, and so it's a really existential threat to the government there. It's an existential threat to the society there, because I mean, they're already not the cheapest cost of labor anymore because there's so fewer Chinese workers in comparison to what they once were. They're much more skilled. They've been in the workforce a lot longer time now, so those trades have been learned, but there's just fewer of them in comparison to other parts of the world now with regards to the available workers, because over half of their population is out of the workforce because they've now grown too old. So the amount of people that are left in the workforce there are fewer, which causes a supply and demand, a balancing and equilibrium to where that they're able to get higher wages because they're paid higher in order to come to work, right, and to make whatever product is that they need, because there's just fewer people out there looking for that job. So they have to be incentivized to show up to this factory versus that factory, right? So, and then the way you do that is by paying them. So, so it's no longer the cheapest cost of labor. It's not the preferred place to go to manufacture it. You've got a lot of problems with just logistics now, getting things to and from China. They're starving for natural resources. So a lot of the inputs that companies need in order to, whether those are hydrocarbon fuels or the electricity that they need. So importing coal or natural gas in order to turn the factories on and do what they need to do is more expensive and less readily available in China. But so it's just a changing of the times. I mean, they and then in addition to that, they printed about 3 times the amount of sovereign debt per GDP that the United States currently has at $33 trillion in debt. At least we have a growing GDP. We have immigration that offsets any sort of depopulation of the natural-born American population that's here and maybe only has two kids. You need about 2.1 children per married couple in order to grow your population, right? Otherwise, you stagnate or decrease. I think China's at about 1.4 or 1.5 children per married couple.
It's terminal, right? Like it's just terminal. There's no. They should have changed it 30 years ago, right? They should have made. 30
years ago. They should have.
Yeah,
exactly. So, but they're not the only ones. I mean, Russia is also in a depopulation decline, and that's now sped up with the war. You're losing population left and right in that childbearing age, generation that right now is dying in Ukraine instead of at home creating kids. And I think that actually I saw Elon Musk. He's, if whatever your politics are and whatever you think about kind of his view of the world right now, depending on what side of the political aisle or landscape that you sit on, I don't think anybody can blame that guy for not being smart, right? He's built some of the biggest companies in the world, and he's an important figure in our culture, in our economy for a reason. But I saw recently, maybe a few months ago, he was being interviewed, and he said and then the interviewer couldn't understand why he said this, but he said it's completely true, which it goes along what you're saying with Peter Zion and others talking about demographics. The greatest threat to the world right now is depopulation. Is if you're in a society that is shrinking in population, like Western Europe is, like China is, like Russia is, the Middle East, for instance, that is how your country eventually loses economic power and it loses its ability to function. I mean, because you won't be able to fill those jobs. You won't be able to grow the economy. The social systems, for instance, in China, how do you, when you're servicing 3 times the amount of debt that has to be paid off with half the people that you're currently paying that three times, debt off, and then all of a sudden you have half the people that are in the future going to be able to service that debt. How does that happen? Just mathematically, right? Like it just the cost structure of debt is going to go through the roof in a place like China and Italy, Germany, Britain, all these different countries in Europe are dealing with a lot of the same terminal demographics that China's dealing with and that Russia's dealing with. So, it's a serious problem, and I just don't think that enough people are really kind of paying attention to these movements in the demographic world, and maybe it's because a lot of guys are tech, or they're in healthcare, or they're in industries that are kind of a here and now industry, things that change rapidly.
Right.
5 years in the tech world is a long time, right? Because there's so many innovations and so many things that change in a 5-year period. But when you're like a guy like me who's looking at infrastructure, infrastructure systems are built to last, and they're built there for decades. And so when you're building a railroad, or you're building a pipeline, or a terminal, or an airport, or whatever the case may be, a power plant, that's servicing a community or a market that's going to be needing to use that. You're making a long-term bet that people are going to use that product for a long period of time, or that it's going to be a critically needed function that is going to be, your system's going to be paid in a long-term capacity in order to service that demand in the economy. So as I look at what I do in life, I mean, I very much look at stuff like demographics and long-term ramifications of what countries are doing, so what civilizations and societies are doing in different places of the world. And as we talked about earlier previously months ago, Peter, I think is throwing fastballs straight down the middle and right over the plate. I think he's completely right on just the demographics of these places like China, that are just, the world's going to look a lot different in 20 years than it looks today, just based on these demographic trends. And it's not something that people can change. And it doesn't matter whether you're left or right, red or blue, male or female. It is what it is. It's math.
Facts are facts.
Basic math.
Math is math. Yeah. Facts are facts. And it's funny because it looks like, his last book was saying that the 2 or 3 countries that are really, really well positioned to weather this just fine: Mexico, United States, Canada. Demographically speaking,
Canada's actually got a problem. Canada's actually got, if it wasn't for immigration, they obviously have a strong immigration policy, but their immigration is the only thing that's keeping them, kind of buoyant. But they're actually in a little bit of a decline in Canada. They don't have, and a lot of their demographic of immigration is for a lot of the higher end tech,
right,
and more skilled labor workers, and what they need is more lower income, less skilled labor that are going to be able to work the factories and, work the oil fields, work the jobs that are going to allow their commodities and products to be able to be competitive on a global scale, because their labor market has got to be in a competitive landscape, right? You can't expect to pay some guy in Canada, in Vancouver, $50 an hour to create the same product that somebody in New Mexico can create, or Texas can create, for $8, right? So it's just, the cost structures are just going to never win if you're dealing with a Canadian product that is that expensive. And it's a very similar issue that the Chinese are having is the same thing. And of course, Japan and Korea are selling more diapers to people over the age of 60 than they are to kids under 6, if you know what I'm saying. So, that's another kind of real key indicator on, what's the future of that country look like, when you're selling more diapers to elderly than you are kids. So
when adult diapers are being outsold than the children's diapers, and then you're in terminal decline for sure. Mark, we are out of time. Man, it's so awesome talking, but always is. I always learn something every time I talk to you, and I wish you nothing but luck for the future.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Scott.